So, continuing forward with my assessment of the Santa Susana Field Laboratory cleanup, which I again consider a nuclear attack. Well, it's an ongoing dirty bomb detonation. That's all it is. Under the guise of using words like experiment and public good and Cold War, whatever the hell they want to come up with. So this I came across, which is the RocketDyne Cleanup Coalition. And this is how I'm going to show you fascism works. Because fascism is just like any other element of humanity. Just like Christianity, what I say it is Christianity, but just as an example, there's different denominations. You have the Lutherans compared with the Seventh-day Adventists compared with the Pentecostal evangelicals. So there's, compared with the Methodists, who's the other one? I think it's the Methodist or the Presbyterian, one of those that have even gone so far, Anglican, whatever, Christians that have the first woman lesbian bishop. So you have a wide way of spectrum. This is how fascism works too. The most important thing to understand here is this is criminal behavior that has resulted in the ill, devastating health effects of thousands upon thousands of otherwise would be, absent from any kind of legal argument, full-scale American citizens. Which doesn't just mean that they, see, there's two ways to look at it. You can either look at it like that means they're afforded the protections under the power constructed by the American infrastructure, or you could look at the Constitution to mean that it designates the people to be equal, the citizen to be equal with the state. Now, Washingtonian type mentalities, just like I'm talking about George Washington, who did not see it as equal. He saw it as the people are only afforded whatever protections the government deems him. That's why it's Washingtonian. It's because it's him. At his mindset was that whatever I deem appropriate protection for you is what the only rights you're afforded according to the Constitution as we intended it. And proof of that is that the first military action ever performed, first formalized military action ever performed under the leadership of the United States of America and under the call of the commander-in-chief and the formalized military was George Washington sent Alexander Hamilton, who founded the first central bank and that legacy, sent Alexander Hamilton with 15,000 newly formed and trained and armed and uniformed U.S. troops against 5,000 American farmers and their families who were struggling for their livelihood. That's more troops than at any time that were ever used in the American Revolution to fight against a single battle against any British force. Carry that to the forward, and the mentality of George Bush's, of Obama's, of Bill Clinton's, are the mentality of, no, the Constitution cannot be interpreted, and the Bar Association with all the judges perpetuate this, cannot be deemed to be interpreted as the citizen is equal with the state, because then what power does the state have? And if the state doesn't have any power, what the hell do I have my job for? So I know that the state has to have more power than the citizen has rights. So on that note, this is how fascism works. If it were the equal and the equal, some kind of equal society, then the perpetrator, then the experimentalist guys, the genuinely concerned and just, I'm trying to do my job, people behind this would be treated like Black Panthers or like the MOVE organization or like Occupy Wall Streeters or like women trying to get a vote or like Indians trying to get treaties to be established like AIM. And that means that they will be shot. Like John Trudell, his house was burned to the ground an hour after he burnt the American flag on the steps of the FBI with his mother-in-law, his wife, and his 2 kids. That would be happening to these guys if the state and the citizen were equal, because the extent of the activities that they have done and the horrific repercussions that they have raped. Rape is imposing oneself upon thousands and thousands, and that's only in the immediate, because we all know that this is going to go forward to an unforeseen distance in time. And whatever might perpetuate it even further, like this cleanup, is going to be one thing that's going to expound it exponentially insanely. But anyways, on that note, so this group is a RocketDyne Cleanup Coalition. They're set up to be, oh, we're against the bad companies that did this. But their notion of being bad is forcing these companies to accept the millions of dollars, because they're not paying for it. You gotta understand this is a Superfund activity that's been deemed by the governor and congressional people to accept millions and potentially billions of dollars and create contracts with their own trucking companies that they hire out a bunch of cheap, dirt poor, desperate truckers to drive around radioactive trucks, digging crane operators and stuff like that. It's going to be interesting how unions sell out their people, or maybe because it's in Simi Valley, they're going to be able to bypass the unions. But it's going to be tricky because they're going to go through Los Angeles. So there's going to be some new union busting crap. Or I'm not pro-union, don't get me wrong, because they're just as insane as a state. Because an employee should know their own individual, whether you lose your job or not, you should know your own individual sense. So this is the RocketDyne Cleanup Coalition. And this is how, what they're doing is, their goal is to force the cleanup through by not allowing NASA and Boewing and RocketDyne to use propaganda. They don't use that word, but they act like they don't use the word. The sentiment is the word. That's why we have the language. But to use, stop those companies from using propaganda to terrify the surrounding communities, to stir up resentment, so the communities, people like me, end up saying stuff that's negative and allow them to get away with not cleaning it up. But my thing is, they want the site. They want to continue doing activities on the site, but they can't put people on there because it's so dirty. So what do they got to do? They got to get the shit out. And that means taking it through communities. And so this is where fascism works. These women are so American, because it's for women and primarily the thing, but it's a group, we'll get into it. They're so American that in their American duty, they can, I'm going to read this to you, but they don't recognize any criminal activity. This is just like the current FBI director. This is fascism, where he says in his speech to the New York bar regarding specifically financial transactions that led to the global catastrophe. The first part of the double-dip recession, the second part is coming at the end of this year. No one was surprised. You're going to act surprised, but it was a double-dip recession. We only got one dip. When it goes down and it comes back up, double dip means it goes back down. There's not in the middle is not a recovery. So, but on that financial transactions, he says, unlike drug transactions where it's just about connecting the parties involved, financial transactions, you got to understand what the guy was thinking. And it doesn't matter, he says this, it doesn't matter how many people are hurt by the negative behavior. You can't just put people in jail for making a mistake. But there's a guy in California in jail for stealing a piece of pizza for 25 years to life. So, and his intention was not to profit or anything like the bankers. His intention was to eat. So, here we go. They're going to read their argument, their presentation for the RocketDyne Cleanup Coalition. What is the Santa Susana Field Laboratory? The Santa Susana Field Laboratory, SSFL, is a former nuclear and rocket engine testing site located in the hills above San Fernando and Simi Valley. In 1959, a reactor at the SSFL experienced a partial nuclear meltdown in which a third of the reactor fuel experienced melting. Radiation monitors went off scale, i.e. radiation levels were higher than the monitors calibrated to read. The reactor had no containment structure, and radioactive gases were vented into the atmosphere for weeks. 3 other reactors at the site also suffered accidents, and there were numerous radioactive fires at the hot laboratory. Radioactive waste were burned in an open-air burn pit for decades. All told, SSFL housed 10 nuclear reactors, a fuel fabrication facility for plutonium, one of the most toxic materials on the planet. Just 7 kilos of plutonium sent up in the atmosphere can kill every living being on the surface of the planet. And numerous other nuclear operations. Decades of sloppy practices, accidents, and releases resulted in widespread contamination by radioactive materials. This contamination remains at the site and in the surrounding areas. If it's at the site, it's in the surrounding areas that were affected as well. This is fascism's limited purview, intentional. It's artificial intelligence. That's what this is. You want to see what artificial intelligence? You don't got to look in the future of Terminator or the Matrix. Artificial intelligence are these right here. In addition, tens of thousands of rocket tests were conducted at SSFL, resulting in significant chemical contamination. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of, I don't even know how to say this, I'm not going to say it, TCE, were used to flush out rocket test engines and then allowed to seep into the soil and groundwater. SSFL is also contaminated with perchlorate, dioxins, heavy metals, and volatile and semi-volatile organics that can cause harm to human health. These are very toxic materials that can cause solid tumor cancer, as well as leukemia and developmental, genetic, neurological, and immune system disorders and more. See, this is another element of fascism. That's backwards. Cancers and leukemias are the least common medical effect of radiation. The other things, developmental, genetic, neurological, and immune system disorders, including bone disorders, that maybe kids getting broken bones really easily, those are all the most common symptoms, if you want to call it that. But focusing on cancer, which doesn't matter, cancer is still at a high rate anyways, they call them cancer clusters, but focusing on cancer is another fascist way of minimizing the extent of the damage. And they do all the studies on cancer. They don't do it on bones, and they don't do it on miscarriages. Faux show. Imagine what they did if they found out that the miscarriages in the valley were significantly higher. What do you think the sentiment would be? Oh, let's just clean it up? Or every parent that lost a child in the rocket, oh, it's not all of our fault. Kill them. I bet you that'd be the sentiment, huh? Oh, but we don't want that. We need to keep order. We need to keep a perfect union. Why is it important to fully clean up SSFL? Fully clean up. Okay, why don't they clean up Chernobyl, huh? Clean up 3 Mile Island. Oh, it's still operational. Several studies have indicated elevated cancer rates associated with proximity to the sites and exposure to the contaminants. Epidemiological studies by the UCLA School of Public Health Studies found significantly elevated cancer of the lungs and blood and lymph symptoms associated with workers exposed to radioactive and chemical toxins. A study for the Federal Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, ATSDR, found elevated rates of cancer of bladder, thyroid, aerodigestive tract, and blood and lymph systems in people living off-site associated with the proximity of the site. That means the San Fernando Valley. The wind blows here. Another study from the ATSDR by professional Yoram Cohen and his UCLA team showed the population from SSFL migrated off-site. The pollution from SSFL migrated off-site and at levels in excess of EPA acceptable limits. If SSFL is not cleaned up, the site will continue to threaten nearby communities via toxic migration. There have been over 100 exceedances of pollution standards and runoff from the site reported by the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board in just the last few years. A TCE plume extends off-site. Perchlorate has been found in numerous wells in Simi Valley and in Dayton Creek in Dayton Canyon. Strontium-90 was found at Runkle Ranch. Other contaminations have been found by the nearby Bandis Camp and Sage Ranch. The headwaters of the Los Angeles River are located at SSFL and have already been impacted by storm water runoff from the contaminated site. In short, when the wind blows and the rain falls, radioactive and chemical pollution, and the site can migrate off-site, posing risk to nearby communities. Posing risk to nearby communities. If it's all, the site is the source, and it's been doing this for decades, then the site is no longer the source. The site has already been exponential. This is why the NRCC, when Fukushima happened, they mocked the Japanese government, saying, well, if this was a accident that happened in America, our regulations deem that we create a 50-mile radius of evacuation, because they only did a 24-mile evacuation center, and they're like, well, we would have done it like this. You know, there's a little problem right here. It's called Los Angeles, the second biggest city in the United States, qualifies as within the contaminated range that needs to be effectively and immediately, whether you like it or not. It's not practical. It's too much money. We need to keep all of our money, cut the military budget for a year, and vacate Los Angeles. That doesn't make sense. Why would you want to do something like that? The rules are meant to be broken. What is the status of the SSFL cleanup? The Boeing Company, U.S. Department of Energy, and NASA are responsible parties for the contamination at the site. The California Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC, has primarily responsibility for assuring that the site is cleaned up. Over the years, the community has struggled with both the DTSC and the responsible parties to clean up SSFL to levels that would be most protective of public health. In 2007, most protective. In 2007, that means they have no intention of, they realize at the same time, this is language realizing that we can never go back. It can never be cleaned up. They just want to bring it down to what they consider acceptable levels, which means that all of those diseases are still going to be actively infecting the surrounding communities. It's just going to be, it's going to look normal. That's all they want to do, is bring it down to look normal. There's no goal in eliminating it. Oh, you can't eliminate that kind of stuff, so why try? In 2007, after 4 previous attempts were beaten back by Boewing, then State Senator Sheila Cohen, and Assembly Member, now Congresswoman Julia Brownlee, one passage of SB 990, requiring SSFL be cleaned up to strong protective standards. Support for SB 990 included both Ventura and Los Angeles counties. Boeing subsequently refused to comply with the law and sued to overturn it. The case is currently on appeal. Also in 2007, U.S. District Court Samuel Conti ruled in favor of the City of Los Angeles, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Committee to Bridge the Gap in a lawsuit they brought against DOE. The court found that DOE, Department of Energy, plans to not clean up the great majority of radioactive contamination at the site violated federal environmental laws. In 2010, NASA and DOE signed administrative orders on consent, AOCs, with the DTSC, agreeing to clean up all contamination on their parts of the property to background levels, meaning returning the property to the condition it was before it was polluted. Possible. There were 2 rounds of public comment proposed on AOCs. Approximately 3,700 comments were received, 99% of which strongly supported the AOCs. Support included the Ventura County Democrats. Recently, Ventura County, the City of Los Angeles, and the City of Simi Valley have all affirmed their support. Senator Boxer was a major supporter. A more complete list is included below. Boeing refused to enter into a similar AOC, and its allies have opposed the AOCs entered into by NASA and the DOE. AOCs have special exemption built into them to protect Native American artifacts and endangered species. In 2012, EPA completed a 40 million multi-year radiation survey which identified 500 places on the property with contamination with plutonium-239, cesium-137, strontium-90, and other radioactive pollutants as much as 1,000 times background. Now, why don't they come to Canoga Park and Woodland Hills and start doing those studies too? We're part of the test site now. It's the cleanup of risk. Boeing and its surrogates, as well as some within NASA, are pushing to have the AOCs breached and instead use cleanup standards hundreds of thousands of times weaker than required by the AOCs. This would result in most, if not all, contamination remaining not cleaned up. For example, if the AOCs were broken, the alternative standard they were pushing would put in place, none of the 500 locations identified by EPA with radioactive contamination would be cleaned up. NASA admits that if it could break the AOC and use lesser cleanup requirements, 90% of its contamination would be left at SSFL not cleaned up. Boeing and NASA could save a lot of money if they did not have to clean up pollution for which they were responsible. They're getting tax cuts anyways. It's called subsidies. but people and their weapons contractors, but people living in the area would thus be continued to risk of cancer health impacts from the contamination. Perhaps most troubling, the DTSC, currently under intense public scrutiny for being influenced by polluter lobbyists, including Boewing, has shown many indications that it will break out of the cleanup agreement. It is imperative to demand the responsible parties of the DT and the DTSC fully clean up all the radioactive and chemical contamination at SSFL, restoring the land to the way it was prior to the polluted is only the responsible course of action that would ensure community health is proceeding. Which, no, putting these motherfuckers in jail, executing people, death for murder. This is real. This is it. This is California. We have the death penalty. Executing people for murder would be the right way of cleaning up. Start one. And then when you get the people start cleaning up, they clean up with a different mentality. Trying to get out of the, okay, why is the cleanup a negative impact? Trying to get out of the cleanup of toxic contamination for which they are responsible. Boeing and NASA have tried to get some community members to believe that they would have negative impacts and get them to support not cleaning up the great majority of the pollution. Truck traffic issues have been greatly exaggerated. For example, NASA's draft EIS in fact shows 3 trucks an hour, and if spread over 3 routes considered, only 1 truck an hour, far less, has been going in and out of SSFL over decades in operations. Alternatives such as natural gas, electric powered trucks to reduce emissions, shipping by rail have not been considered. Boeing and NASA have also tried to get shipping by rail. Oh my gosh. Have also tried, that means going straight through downtown Los Angeles. Have also tried to get out of cleanup obligations by trying to get some people to be fearful over the alleged impact of cleanup on the sites. Okay, look at how dangerous all the material is, and it's going to be moving around. But, oh, why were they're trying to get people to be scared of that. But that's not what we see. Look, that's not what we see. They're not trying to get people to be scared of it. They're telling people they have 11 studies to prove that there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of the material. They have 11 studies to show that there's nothing wrong with any of the material. The cleanup should go right ahead. So this is falsifying false information. However, the areas that need to be cleaned up are primarily areas distributed. The sites and reactor test sites are not pristine areas in the first place. The contaminated areas primarily where soil had already been scraped away 6 inches originally, structures constructed, and huge amounts of pollutants just dumped into the soil. By NASA's own estimate, only 0.5% of SSFL will be priority conservation habitat that might get disturbed by cleanup, representing 0.5 acres of southern willow scrub and 7 acres of Ventura coastal whatever. In addition, claims have been made about Native American artifacts at the AOC. So, what groups support this? Who supports this cleanup? U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, Congressional woman Julie Brownlee, State Senator Fran Pavley, Ventura County Board of Supervisors, Los Angeles City Council, City of Simi Valley, Friends of the Earth, Natural Resources Defense Council, Consumer Watchdog, Southern California Federation, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then let me get over here real quick. I only got a couple more minutes. This is an interesting on the same thing. Group sues to stop the cleanup. Simi Valley Democratic Club, Progressive Democrats for Santa Monica. I'm writing a piece right now that talks about how the Republicans are the main one behind it. Four public interest organizations have filed suit against the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC, and Department of Health, DPH, to prevent radiological contamination waste from Santa Susana Field Laboratory from going to sites not licensed or designated for radioactive waste. Yeah, where are they going to take this stuff? The lawsuit for Consumer Watchdogs Committee, Bridge the Gap, Physicians for Social Responsibility in Los Angeles, and the Southern California Federation of Scientists allege that Boeing has been demolishing buildings in Area 4 in the Santa Susana Field Laboratory and sending waste that, according to Boeing's own measurements, is radioactive contaminated and dumps at recycling centers not accepted, so probably in the valley. A new study issued by Committee to Bridge the Gap reports that contaminated debris from 6 structures have been delivered to municipal and hazard waste landfills that are not licensed to accept low-level radiation waste and metals, asphalt, and concrete recyclers. The lawsuit was filed the day after the letter. The complaint, I'm going to skip down here, the complaint cites the violation of the California environmental RICO. It's radioactive material, it's nuclear material, it's RICO, but California doesn't have the RICO. You got to go federal. DTS, this is Area 4 says the respondents have approved without environmental review the demolition and disposal of structures that are, by Boeing's own measurements, radiologically contaminated. Complaint says. Worse, respondents are expressly approving Boeing's disapproval of the radiological contaminated waste offsite to toxic waste facilities that are neither licensed nor designated to accept radiological material. Many tons of these materials have even been sent to recycling facilities so that these radioactive materials may enter the commercial metal supply. The RocketDyne Cleanup Coalition, the story is all too familiar. RCC protests over the decade ago. Boeing tried to ship radioactive waste from the burn pit where radioactive waste was illegally burned in Buttonwillow to low-income community of color, Canoga Park, which has already suffered negative health impacts, miscarriages. To learn more about Buttonwillow community is source, okay? So I'm closing, but this is like a diamond. If you look at one side, all you do is see the reflection from all about it. It's very simple. This is a crime that needs to be dealt with as a crime. People need to be prosecuted and executed and jailed. No fines. And then you start whatever cleanup, because the mentality of the people cleaning up is going to be a lot different when they see that their predecessors who engaged in corrupt and nefarious activities that led to the deaths of millions, the thousands and thousands of babies, and to the detrimental health of millions of people, they're going to have a different mindset.